Um, Hello, everybody. This is Francois Carlier for my YouTube channel and the interview today of a Kennedy assassination researcher. His name is Robert Morrow. Sorry, Robert Morrow. Do I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. Robert
Okay.
Morrow, that's close enough. Yeah.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about the Kennedy assassination. Robert Morrow is a researcher from Texas. He's a well-known Kennedy assassination researcher, and he'll tell us what he thinks, what he believes, according to his studies or his research. So, Robert, welcome to the program, and nice to talk to you. I will ask
Likewise.
you, I will ask you the questions that I always ask. First one is, when did you start? What's your path into the Kennedy assassination? Who have you met? Where did you go? What books did you read? What did you learn? Then the second question, of course, will be, what are your conclusions today? What are your conclusions today? Do you believe in a conspiracy or not? Then the follow-up question is, what evidence do you have, or what arguments do you put forth to support your conclusions? And then I will ask you, do you have any anecdotes, worth mentioning? And of course, after that, we can talk about. I will ask you a few questions about, David Lifton's theory, Jim Fetzer, things like that. And but of course, you will tell us about Lyndon Johnson because you're an expert on the Lyndon Johnson side of the Kennedy assassination, and you have things to tell us about him. And of course, I will ask you, before I leave, I will ask you about Malcolm Wallace, because he was one of the people whose name was mentioned as maybe a shooter. So it is going to be interesting. So, first of all, introduce yourself, and we're listening.
Okay, well, my name is Robert Morrow. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm age 60. I'm originally from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I went to high school there at a preparatory school called Tuscaloosa Academy, where I was a basketball star and a good student, but not the best student, but definitely the best basketball player.
You are
Uh,
tall.
yeah, and so I'm 6'4". It's a small high school, but so I graduated there in 1983 from high school. So then I attended Princeton University from 83 to 87, and I got a AB in history from Princeton. And I want to say something very quickly here. While I was at Princeton, nobody there, no professor, no student, no magazine that I was reading ever told me anything credible about the JFK assassination. And I took a heavy load of history classes, politics classes, and so forth, because I really wasn't very good at math or, hard sciences. And I remember we used to have a book fair up there every year, because Princeton is a very literate university. It's a very literate town. So they have a used book fair on the floor of the hockey arena. And everybody brings their used books there, and there are like hundreds of tables, and you browse amongst them, and there's all kinds of interesting books. And I distinctly remember back in 1986 or so going to that book fair and intentionally avoiding every book on the JFK assassination. Okay, I was back then. That was at the time of the Iran-Contra affair. United States was having wars in Central America. We were funding the right wing and the death squads in El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras, and the left wing and the Sandinistas were trying to foment rebellion down there. And so that was my focus. But I remember I would go through all these tables, and every book on JFK had a different take on it. It's like so confusing. And these are books that were published in the 1970s and early 80s. Okay, so we're talking just up to spring of 87. And I distinctly remember avoiding every book. Like, I don't even want to talk about this. I don't want to learn about this. I don't even know what it means. I don't even know what I think about it. I assume Oswald killed Kennedy. That's what the media tells me. That's it. So fast forward, 20 X number of years. The year is 2008. I was a big Ron Paul supporter running for president, a big local activist organizer for him. And we tried really hard in the Republican primary. and we weren't going to win, but we gave it our best. We did well locally because Austin has a lot of libertarian influence in the town. So that was March of 2008. Right after that, I got online at Education Forum and started reading a thread about Lyndon Johnson being involved in the JFK assassination. And Francois, within 10 minutes, I was convinced LBJ did it. Not 10 years of research, not 10 months of research, not 10 books that I read, not even one book that I read, one thread that I read. Because I've been doing a lot of research on the Clintons at the past 3 years. I've become an expert on Bill and Hillary Clinton, and I'd bought about 400 or 500 books on them. And so when you read on a topic from each different angle, you learn a lot. If you just read one book, that ain't enough. You just read all the pro-Clinton books, that's not enough. You just read the anti-Clinton books, that's not enough. You try to read on a topic from every single conceivable angle, and you would not believe the kind of stuff you will learn by doing that. So that in the spring of '88, I saw a woman on that thread Education Forum named Dawn Meredith. She's a lawyer here in Austin, Texas. And I saw that she thought LBJ did it, and she lived in Austin, and she was a lawyer. I said, well, I'm going to call her up. She's local. I'll get her on the phone. So I called Dawn Meredith probably in March or April of 2008. We'll call it March, end of March. And I said, Dawn, I was reading this thread on Education Forum. You were commenting on that, and you guys were indicted. You were having an argument about whether Lyndon Johnson was involved or not, and I think you guys are right. And she said, well, nice to hear from you, Robert. And she had been studying this since she was 14 years old. I think she was age 14 when the JFK assassination occurred. She had a sharp interest in this all throughout her upper teenage years and her adult life. And she'd gone to a lot of the conferences, and she knew a lot of the top researchers. So I said, Dawn, give me the names of the top 10 JFK researchers in the entire country of the United States and their phone numbers and their email address. I want to call them and talk to them. She said, sure. And then I called them all as best I could. And the first thing I would ask them is, what 10 books should I read on the JFK assassination? So I immediately asked them, what books should I read? And I'm sure I probably called Robert Groen. Then I called probably got Ed Tatro on the phone. I ran into Bar McClellan and numerous other ones like that. And so I went to Amazon, used books, and started buying all these JFK assassination books used, and just started building a collection. And so it took me several years to really form a very strong viewpoint of what I thought happened. I mean, I knew LBJ did it, but for a year or two, I was confused whether the CIA was involved. And then Dawn just said, Robert, they were involved. But I started reading material like, Oswald was probably U.S. intelligence. That means he's probably CIA. And gradually I came to believe that elements of U.S. intelligence and the military were involved in killing John Kennedy. But that was after I concluded that Lyndon Johnson did it first, because of the hatred between him and the Kennedys and everything. Francois, if you buy 20 books on LBJ and 20 books on the Kennedys, you will find so many anecdotes about how Lyndon Johnson and the Kennedys hated each other's guts. It's all over the biographies. Every biography. The LBJ biographies have it. The Kennedy biographies have it. Biographies that are peripheral to those families, they all have a Kennedy and LBJ hating each other moment in there. I'll give you one example would be, Ron Kessler wrote a book about the Secret Service. And he has all these behind the scenes anecdotes about these presidents. And Lyndon Johnson comes off as crazy, maniacal, dictatorial, crude, vulgar, disgusting. And the Secret Service would say stuff like, well, if he wasn't president, he'd be in a mental hospital. And one of the things they would tell Ron Kessler was that when LBJ died in January of 1973, there was not one photo of John Kennedy up in his entire house at the LBJ ranch.
Oh, okay. Oh, really?
Not one. And that's just one tiny anecdote. I've got about 100 other ones that are like that. So from that point on, March of 2008, I started studying the JFK assassination obsessively. Passionately is a word I can use rather than obsessively, but both. And I have a file, a Word document file, where I cut and paste all my information on there. And here I am today.
Okay, fascinating, very interesting. Okay, and well, then here you are today. What are your conclusions about the Kennedy assassination?
Yeah, and by the way, I'm willing to change my mind, and I have changed my mind over the years. Things that I wrote in 2011, there are things I do not believe now. I used to believe that George Herbert Walker Bush was involved because he was Texas Oil and CIA and acting like he was covering up the assassination. I don't believe that anymore. I don't believe that George Herbert Walker Bush was involved. I do think that because he was Texas Oil, CIA, and intelligence, he knew what happened. He figured it out, like a lot of people in Texas did, the elites did. And so my conclusions today would be, in a nutshell, Lyndon Johnson and D.H. Byrd, who owned the Texas School Book Depository building, and Ed Clark, a very close crooked lawyer of LBJ, used their connections in the CIA and especially the military to murder John Kennedy. And they did it for the number one reason was the war between Lyndon Johnson and the Kennedys. So Oliver Stone, who produced the movie JFK, does not understand what happened. Okay.
Oh, he doesn't?
No, he doesn't. He does not include Lyndon Johnson in the plot to kill John Kennedy at all. Correct.
Mm-hmm. Not in the JFK movie. That's true. Yeah.
Well, he implies it a bit in the JFK movie. That's in 1991. But over time, he has completely eliminated LBJ as being involved.
Okay.
And therefore, he does not understand. In my opinion, he does not understand the JFK assassination. He thinks it's all about Vietnam. It was not about Vietnam. So you're probably saying, well, Robert, where do any Castro-Cubans come into here? So according to my theory and my research, these elements of the military used CIA-affiliated anti-Castro-Cubans to shoot and murder John Kennedy. So the trigger people were people who were involved in the CIA's and the U.S. military's anti-Castro efforts. These were people who, in my opinion, were training to murder and kill Fidel Castro. And because they hated John Kennedy so much, and by the way, they did, Francois. I've been down to Miami. I've talked to these 80-year-old anti-Castro-Cubans. 50, 60 years later, they have a fanatical hatred, not just of Castro, but of John Kennedy.
Oh, really?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Why? Because he did not. The Bay of Pigs, they cut the air power to the Bay of Pigs, the air support. They let them get captured. They did not come in with the U.S. military. Richard Nixon was telling Kennedy, you need to invade with the military. He did not do that. Okay. Then fast forward a year and a half to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Bay of Pigs was April of 61. Cuban Missile Crisis is October of 62. And they were like, you need to bomb Cuba. You need to invade. It's not good enough to settle this thing. You have to take out Castro now. Of course, that would have caused World War III because the Russians had their nukes operational. We found that out decades later when Fidel Castro told that to Robert McNamara at a conference in the early 1990s. Robert McNamara was stunned by that. I mean, the Russians had their nukes ready to roll, ready to shoot. We could not have just gone in there and bombed them and then blown up their bunkers and not had nuclear war. We would have had nuclear bombs going off in America if John Kennedy had taken the stupid advice of the anti-Castro-Cuban community and invaded during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I'm not going to go into right now why I think the anti-Castro-Cubans were involved, but I'll tell you why. Because I happen to believe that Air Force General Edward Lansdale, who was very close to DM of Vietnam, I believe he was involved because Fletcher Prouty identified him at Dealey Plaza. Victor Krulak, a general, identified him at Dealey Plaza. And also we just found out that the wife of Lansdale identified him in that photo.
Oh, she did?
Yes. She told that to Richard Billings in the 1980s, and Richard Billings told it to Danny Sheehan, who told it to me this past November in Dallas. I'm going to drink some water here. So I'm giving you a roundabout reason why I think any Castro Cubans were involved, because I think Lansdale was involved. And see, everybody had their own reasons. Okay, why would Edward Lansdale be involved in killing John Kennedy? Why? The answer is because he was enraged at being run out of the Kennedy administration. He got fired on October 31st of 1963. And then while he was being fired on that very day, Francois, 12 hours around the world, it's November the 1st, it's in Vietnam, and DM is being overthrown in a coup sanctioned by John Kennedy. Kennedy did not want DM murdered. He wanted him overthrown because he thought he was going to lose to the communists if he wasn't. And then DM is murdered the next day. So imagine Lansdale having a very, very good friend who he knew for 10 years, who he helped to stabilize South Vietnam with, who he wanted to be the George Washington of South Vietnam, being murdered by people who we told overthrow him. Lansdale was in a rage. And I think he took it out on JFK 3 weeks later. So the death of DM would be on November the 2nd. 20 days later, you have the death of John F. Kennedy in Dallas. And I think he went down there. And you say, well, how do you know that? Well, when the movie JFK was being made, Oliver Stone sent John Newman and David Lifton out to the Hoover Institution to go through the Lansdale records. That's where it's a right-wing think tank. Probably is either on Stanford University campus or very close to it. And they went through these files and they could not find anything that would give Lansdale an alibi from being in other words, they were trying to see if he was in another city in the world other than Dallas, Texas, because of that photo that's in dispute, right? And they couldn't find it. And instead, they found correspondence between Edward Lansdale and his really good friend, General, quote, Hanging Sam Williams, saying, I'm going to come down and visit you this fall. Well, this fall, that's November of 63. Lansdale is still in Washington, D.C. on October 31st, okay? Because he goes, if you read Max Boot's book on Lansdale, The Road Not Taken, he's having a little going away party on Halloween Day on October 31. And Robert McNamara walks through it and does not even stop to say hello to Lansdale or thanks for your service, just like he's walking through doo-doo. He just walks straight through it, like, get out of here, good, gone, we're done with you, sick of you. Lansdale had so many enemies in the United States government. So Lifton and Newman found this correspondence saying, hey, I'm coming down to Texas to visit you. Well, General Hanging Sam Williams lived in Denton, Texas. Denton, Texas is a little town northwest of Dealey Plaza. If you map Quest, it's 38 miles away. 38 miles away. That's so close. And then they also found a little notepad from the Hotel Texas. That's where JFK and LBJ stayed the night before the JFK assassination in Fort Worth. And so they found that, and they found this correspondence. And then they left. They couldn't find any alibi for Lansdale not being at Dealey Plaza. Like, for example, was he at a conference in San Francisco? Was he visiting family in, California? Was he on a foreign trip? No, they couldn't find anything. But what happened else that was very suspicious, Francois, John Newman has said this multiple times. After he left Hoover and flew back home to where's Newman from? Massachusetts or something? I don't know. He got a call from the head librarian at the Hoover Institution. And she says, John, there are men from the government here. They're going through every file that you and Lifton went through, and they're classifying it all secret. One after another. Boom, 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 boom. And so that means when Max Boot went to write his biography on Edward Lansdale, he would not have had access to the things that David Lifton and John Newman had. He would not have seen the correspondence saying, hey, I'm coming down to Dallas. I'm coming down to Texas to visit you in the fall. And if you read Max Boot's book, The Road Not Taken, about Lansdale, Max Boot, by the way, believes that a lone nut killed JFK and it was Oswald, okay? But there's so many things in his book that would indict General Edward Lansdale in the JFK assassination if you know what a JFK researcher knows. For example, Lansdale was immediately put back in the government by Lyndon Johnson. He had a job on White House grounds within 11 days of the JFK assassination.
I
So
wasn't aware of it.
no,
I wasn't aware of it.
yeah, it's in Max Boot's book. And within
Okay.
11 days, he is on the government payroll again in the so-called Food for Peace program. And so a lot of times these military and CIA guys, they will use that as a cover. Like I'm with the food, I'm with USAID, when really you're a CIA assassin. Like you ever heard of David Morales? David Morales. Okay, that was one of his covers. It was like, oh, yeah, I'm a healthcare worker with USAID. Oh, by the way, is there anybody here locally who my government wants me to assassinate? I'm here to do that too, but I'm not going to tell you that. But I'm going to hand a cookie out to a school kid. Then I'm going to go kill somebody after hours. So Lansdale, and the big payoff to Lansdale, it's also in Max Boot's book, was that in 1965, Lyndon Johnson gave him a Vietnam portfolio. Like, you get to go to Vietnam and work in counterinsurgency. You know, you were the one who Allen Dulles personally handpicked to stabilize Vietnam in the 1950s. It wasn't John Foster Dulles, it was Allen Dulles, the CIA, the same guy that was on the Warren Commission. You see the links here? And the same guy who was fired by John Kennedy. So let's go over the people who were being fired by John Kennedy, the personal reasons, Francois, not some sort of ideological thing like he's not fighting the Vietnam War, or, you know, the Federal Reserve doesn't like him, whatever. So Lyndon Johnson in the fall of 63 was in the process of being destroyed by the Kennedys. I will go into that later. Lansdale got fired from the Kennedy administration. He had so many enemies. And here's what's so suspicious. Dean Rusk hated him. The Secretary of State, Robert McNamara, hated him. Who else? Curtis LeMay didn't like him. George Bundy, the National Security Advisor, hated Edward Lansdale. People in the CIA hated Lansdale. So many enemies. Now he had some friends, okay, who were impressed by his work in the Philippines, you know, stabilizing that from the communists with Magsaysay, and who were impressed with him working with DM for 10 years. But he had all these enemies. Well, guess what, Francois? All those people who hated Lansdale, hated his guts, they were all still in government when he came back. And the only thing difference was there was a bullet in JFK's head, and Lyndon Johnson was sitting in the White House. So from my point of view, that is payback for helping out with the JFK assassination. LBJ saying, Lansdale, you get what you've always wanted, a Vietnam portfolio. Now, granted, it ultimately failed because he got sent there in 65 and the country's falling apart and the war is ramping up, and whatever he was trying to do wasn't working, but he still got that portfolio.
Okay.
All right, so that's two guys involved, LBJ and Lansdale. We haven't got into the reason why I think LBJ was involved. So the other guy would be D.H. Byrd. So D.H. Byrd was a very wealthy Texas oilman, personal friend of Lyndon Johnson, and a military contractor. And so we have proven this. In November of 1963, D.H. Byrd and James Ling, another investor in Dallas, very close friend to LBJ, bought 132,000 shares of their defense contractor company, LTV, Ling Timco Vault. That's a fact. And we confirmed it by going to Value Line of 1964, and their stock purchases are publicly reported from November of 63. So they bought LTV, a pure play defense contractor, at $16 a share sometime in November. We don't know if it's before the assassination or after, sometime in November. That stock, LTV, by 1967, was trading as high as $169 a share.
10 times more?
10 times, 1,000% increase.
All right. Okay.
And LTV and D.H. Byrd and James Ling made a mint off the Vietnam War. And in 64, they were very quickly awarded a major contract by Lyndon Johnson for a fighter jet. I don't know if it was built or not, but they still made a lot of money. So D.H. Byrd also owned the Texas School Book Depository building. Are you aware of that, right? Very close friend to LBJ, who's the king of the JFK haters. Made a ton of money off the Vietnam War. And here's the other kicker, Francois. D.H. Byrd took out the sniper's window from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building and put it on display at his home. That's a fact. And I've got web links on the internet that prove it to you. And in fact, he had it framed, and then he put a lot of articles about Oswald in the middle of it and hung it in his house. He was a big game hunter, Francois. He would hunt this animal, that animal. He would hang their heads in his house, and he hung the sniper's window. That's like a presidential memo, right up with all of his other dead animals. And I've been inside of his house. His house is on Vassar Lane in North Dallas. I think it's in Hyde Park. I'm not sure. It's a 16,000 square foot house. Its value today is like $12 million. The oil and gas investor T. Boone Pickens bought it, and I went there in 2004 for a fundraiser for the Young Republicans of Texas. And I was there. I was literally in the grand study of D.H. Byrd at a fundraiser. I did not even know at that time. I did not know D.H. Byrd owned that house. I did not know anything about the JFK assassination. I just knew I was in a super big house with a wealthy oil man who was backing George Bush and was going to get a lot of tax breaks from George W. Bush.
Okay.
Other thing that would indict D.H. Byrd, he wrote a book called I'm an Endangered Species. It came out in the year 1978 or 79. That's at the peak of the HSCA. He did not mention that the JFK assassination occurred at a building that he owned. He didn't say, oh, I'm just so sorry that the president got killed right outside the building that I own. He kept very quiet about it.
Oh, okay.
But he did brag about his close friendship with Lyndon Johnson. So those are the things. No, the other thing that indicts D.H. Byrd is I live in Austin, Francois. So, yep. So that's the heart of LBJ country. LBJ used to recruit from the University of Texas young, talented, up-and-coming politicos who were like the student government president of the university, like the head of the students. Like I'm sure at your high school, do y'all have like elections, like class presidents or
yes, we do,
student presidents for the whole school even? Yeah. Well, these were student presidents for the entire University of Texas. So Mac Wallace was one of those. And he was the president in 1944 or 45. And he was protesting the very conservative Texas governor, Coke Stevenson, trying to fire the somewhat more liberal Homer Rainey, president of the University of Texas, because they were letting too many liberal professors teach there. And they didn't like the socialist propaganda. So he led like this huge student protest in favor of the professors. So he started going to work for LBJ not long after that. And there were other people who LBJ recruited from the University of Texas. John Connolly was a student president in 1938. Barefoot Sanders was very prominent there. And I could go on. There are a lot of people that LBJ recruited out of the University of Texas, young men, up-and-coming politicos. So on October 22nd, 1952, Mac Wallace murders a golf pro here in Austin, Texas, about 25 minutes from where I'm sitting right now at the Butler Pitch and Putt golf course. And he murders him in broad daylight, and in cold blood, he walks into the pro shop. It's a small golf course, like only 3 or 4 holes, and it's pitch and putt. It's not like this huge 18-hole golf course. Okay. And it's very beautiful today. It's located in downtown Austin. Very few cities have like a little golf course in the middle of their downtown area. It's cool. And so a lot of people love to go play there. So he kills this guy, and he's caught within 30 minutes on BK's Road, which is a road very close to me. First word out of Mac Wallace's mouth were, I got to go back to Washington, D.C. I work for Senator Lyndon Johnson. Well, Senator Lyndon Johnson was the Democratic minority leader of the Senate at that time. He was not yet the majority leader. He was I think he was the minority. Maybe, I forget when he became minority leader. Was it 51 or 53? I know he became majority leader in 55,
Okay.
but anyhow, he was a very powerful senator in
Mm-hmm.
1951.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in February. So the next February, they had a trial in Austin on Mac Wallace. And Lyndon Johnson is believed pulled a bunch of strings with Ed Clark, and Mac Wallace was convicted of murdering a golf pro. Convicted, and then given a sentence of 5 years probation, no time in jail. Okay, that I've never heard of that in Texas before. Now, in Texas, Francois, back in the 50s, if you were a man and you came home and your wife was like having sex with the mailman or the milkman and you got enraged and you shot him dead, you might get acquitted by reason of passion.
Mm-hmm.
Juries would acquit people, but that's acquitting. In other words, they don't convict them. They'll say, you know what, you lost your mind, you couldn't control yourself, you couldn't. The thought of this milkman having sex with your wife just drove you over the edge. You pulled out your gun. Everybody in Texas has a gun. You killed the guy, and we know you're sorry about it. It was a crime of passion. You're innocent.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Mac Wallace was convicted.
Okay.
Convicted. No,
Yeah,
no
that's a big
innocent to it.
difference.
Convicted.
Mm-hmm.
So the sentence for his conviction by this local judge who's controlled by LBJ and Ed Clark was 5 years probation, no time in jail.
Wow.
And the Austin American Statesman, when they covered that, the local paper said a look just started, a smile started slowly moving across Mac Wallace's face when he was given that sentence. He could kill. That shows you the dark power that Lyndon Johnson wielded in Texas in the 1950s and 60s and 40s. His guys could kill and get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're going to talk about Mac Wallace right now and just dive right into that.
Mm-hmm.
So there was always a question of like, who killed Henry Marshall? So we get along to 1961, and there is the obvious murder of a U.S. agricultural official named Henry Marshall, who was investigating Billy Sol Estes, who I know you personally talked to.
Mm.
How many conversations did you have with Billy Sol Estes?
Only one. Only one. When he came to Paris in 2003. Yeah.
How long was that conversation?
I would say I stayed with him about an hour. We met him with a journalist in Paris, and I was with a journalist who was going to interview him, and she called me beforehand, and she said, "Mr. Carlier, you are well versed in the Kennedy assassination controversy, and I'm going to meet Billy Sol Estes, and can you come with me so that we can talk about it before I write my article?" And that's what I did. And he was with author.
William Raymond.
Yes, but William Raymond, that's funny. William Raymond was stuck in the congestion. Okay, you see the traffic. So it was very late, which allowed me to speak to Billy Sol Estes without him being here to oversee or overhear the conversation. It was interesting, and I remember Billy Sol Estes telling me. I asked him. I remember vividly one question and one answer. I said, "Why did Lyndon Johnson had Kennedy killed?" And he said, "Immunity." I remember him saying that word, immunity. He said that. I remember that.
Well, it's the same reason Donald Trump ran for president in 2024. If you win, you don't go to jail.
Okay.
And so what Billy Sol meant by that was Lyndon Johnson was not going to go to jail for any crime if he killed John Kennedy and got into the White House, whatever crimes LBJ had been committing. Okay. And one of those crimes was probably ordering the murder of Henry Marshall, who was investigating Billy Sol Estes. Now, the problem is Billy Sol Estes is a pathological liar and a cheat and a con man. He's the only guy saying that LBJ used Mac Wallace to kill Henry Marshall. That's our only source on that.
Oh, okay.
There's no other source who says that. It's just all coming from a con man affiliated with Lyndon Johnson. So the question is he telling the truth or not? The one thing that is, in my opinion, just sure about the Henry Marshall case is that it was a blatant murder Henry Marshall got shot 5 times with a bolt-action gun. Hoover got that memo, and he wrote something on like, this just doesn't seem possible. That's J. Edgar Hoover.
Mm-hmm.
Even then they thought it was just crazy that it would be, but it was ruled as suicide. Why? Remember, this murder occurred in Robertson County. That's East Texas, Francois. Okay. Cliff Carter, LBJ's henchman for 35 years, had a Pepsi bottling company within 45 minutes of Robertson County. He was in East Texas. LBJ had all kinds of connections with these sheriffs and everything. So the local sheriff was an LBJ tool, and he ruled this obvious murder was a suicide. Now, I don't know who killed Henry Marshall. Was it Mac Wallace? I tend to think it was Billy Celestis personally, with maybe his brother. Because remember, the indictment of Mac Wallace for this murder only comes from Billy Celestis.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the guy being investigated. And the guy who was investigating him conveniently gets murdered on June the 3rd of 1961. But Billy Saul said Lyndon Johnson said to him back in February of 61, he said, get rid of him. Now, no, Francois, this is very important here. So most people have not figured out this, but I have. John and Robert Kennedy were covering up a murder for Lyndon Johnson, the Henry Marshall murder. And you're saying, well, people will say, well, why would they do that?
Mm-hmm.
They hated Lyndon Johnson. He blackmailed his way onto the ticket in 1960. They were going to get rid of him in 63. They would never do anything like that. Yes, they would. Why, Francois? Why would they cover for LBJ? They did not want a Lyndon Johnson murder infecting the new Kennedy administration and possibly taking it down. So the Attorney General of Texas at that time was a Democrat, an anti-LBJ Democrat named Will Wilson. Okay. And 20 years later, he said that the federal government was giving us absolutely no help in solving the murder of Henry Marshall, none whatsoever. And also that John and Robert Kennedy, the president and the attorney general, were interested in the Henry Marshall case on a minute-by-minute basis. Not give me a weekly update, not give me an update at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Every single minute, what is going on with the investigation into who killed Henry Marshall? Oh my God, it could go back to LBJ. Oh my God, what if the public finds out Johnson's whacking people? What's going to happen to the Kennedy? The vice president has murdered somebody? That's why they covered it up. So they brought in a guy named Barefoot Sanders from the Northern District of Texas. Oh, that's my other thing. That's my other phone. It'll go for 4 rings. Okay. So let me turn that down. Okay. And Barefoot Sanders, who Lyndon Johnson also recruited from the University of Texas to work for him as an aide, goes into East Texas, convenes a grand jury, and they come back with it was a suicide and not a murder. Meaning the original ruling of the LBJ controlled sheriff was it was a suicide. It really wasn't. Obviously it wasn't. Hoover knew it wasn't. And then Henry Marshall supposedly coming in there, the family wanted a new grand jury because they did not believe it at all. The people who worked at the Department of Agriculture thought it was a murder. The family did not think their beloved husband was depressed and committing suicide. They wanted a grand jury. They got a grand jury. And Barefoot Sanders manipulated it into coming back with suicide ruling.
Okay.
That's 1982. 22 years later, U.S. Marshal Clint Peoples, who's a former Texas Ranger, Clint Peoples, brought Billy Celestis into a courthouse in Robertson County and convened a grand jury and officially had the Henry Marshall murder ruled as a murder from a suicide. And that's so the family could collect insurance money and also correct the public record. And the jury was told that all the people involved in the murder of Henry Marshall were now deceased, so you can't indict anybody. And Billy Celeste was telling them that Lyndon Johnson was involved, Cliff Carter was involved, he himself, may have been involved, and then Mac Wallace was involved. And so that's for people who are listening to this, there's something very important you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
You need to go read and I have it, I can email it to you. You need to read the Clint Peoples Oral History with the Dallas Public Library from 1984.
Okay.
And most journalists, I would say no journalist and no academic has ever read it. But I've read it. Yeah, you ever heard of it? Yeah,
No,
yeah.
well, I haven't read it, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's hugely important. The reason it's important is because Clint Peoples was called into judicial quarters in 1984 by 3 federal judges, one of whom was Barefoot Sanders. And Barefoot Sanders was trying to use another judge to intimidate Clint Peoples into not bringing up the Henry Marshall murder again. He was enraged that Clint Peoples took Billy Saul Estes to Robertson County Courthouse and had that suicide ruling changed to a homicide. And that's because Barefoot Sanders was covering the respected liberal judge Barefoot Sanders, who was known for enforcing civil rights provisions, had covered up a murder in 1962 for the Kennedys and LBJ. He did not want that revealed. And Clint Peoples was so concerned about what he was saying in this oral history that he says, you cannot release this oral history until after both of my daughters have died.
Okay.
Both of his daughters had died by 2011, and a JFK researcher told me about this, and we went in there and we got a copy of the Clint Peoples oral history. And the part that he had deleted that you couldn't read for 20 years, you couldn't read this from 1984 to 2011. Okay, that's like 27 years. You could not read this. And the part you couldn't read was Clint Peoples being called into judicial quarters by Barefoot Sanders and 2 other judges who were trying to intimidate him into not correcting the record on the Henry Marshall murder from a suicide. And one judge was disgusted with what was going on, and Barefoot Sanders was using another judge to try and intimidate Clint Peoples into not doing this. And that to me is a smoking gun on the guilt of Barefoot Sanders in covering up a murder. All right, so you're saying, well, what next? Well, at that point, the Kennedys were definitely getting rid of Lyndon Johnson for 64, okay? I mean, he blackmailed his way on the ticket. He hates us. We hate him. He's a loose cannon. He undermines us on every policy position. My God, we just covered up a murder for him. Remember, according to Will Wilson, John and Robert Kennedy were interested in the Henry Marshall murder developments on a minute-by-minute basis. Focused on that. We've got to cover this up. Well, Francois, we just have another data point that came out past couple of years. It's Secret Service Abraham Bolden. You've heard of him, right?
Yeah. He was the black man.
He was a black man, and he was framed, and they sent him to jail because he reported back the lax. He tried to contact the Warren Commission and tell them how lax the Secret Service protection was of Kennedy and how they hated him so much. So they framed him and put him in jail for 3 years. They said he had taken kickbacks from a counterfeiter. Total baloney. So,
you mean total baloney? What he says?
Well, no. What the government
you mean the
said.
accusations
They said
against
that
him?
he had taken kickbacks from a counterfeiter when really
cool.
they were framing him
Okay.
and suborning perjury to get this guy thrown in jail for no good reason at all, because they were mad because he was tattling on them to the Warren Commission.
Okay.
So this is a story that Abraham Bolden has told to many JFK researchers behind the scenes, and he kept it secret, but he was dying to tell people this for years. He would not tell it until after he got his official pardon from President Biden a couple of years ago.
Only Biden? Not
Yeah,
before? Okay.
yeah, no, yeah, it took
Didn't know.
Barack Obama, who is a black Democrat from Chicago, did not pardon Abraham Bolden.
Oh, wow.
Joe Biden did at the behest of a black congressman from the Chicago area. I forget what year it occurred. Was it 2021 or 22? I don't know. I forget. But after he got that pardon, Abraham Bolden started doing YouTube interviews, podcast interviews, and he starts telling about a hugely important anecdote. The time on June the 29th of 61 that he witnessed in the Oval Office at nighttime after work on Thursday, June 29th, a volcanic argument between Lyndon Johnson and the Kennedys in the Oval Office that mentioned Billy Sol Estes, that mentioned the cotton allotments that Estes was abusing, but more importantly, Lyndon Johnson's behavior was so abusive and threatening that Abraham Bolden reported Lyndon Johnson as a security threat to the life of John Kennedy to his superiors in the Secret Service.
Really?
Really. And Abraham Bolden has been on the public record, both by email and with multiple videotaped interviews, saying this since he got his pardon.
Another thing that I missed.
Yes, I want to repeat that because there's many in the, I'm not referring to you, but there's many in the JFK research community who like to ignore the role of Lyndon Johnson in killing John Kennedy. I call them the CIA did it crowd. Abraham Bolden reported in late June of 1961 the vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, as a security threat to the life of John Kennedy to his superiors in the U.S. Secret Service, including directly to the director of the Secret Service, Urbanus E. Bauman. And Abraham Bolden has said this multiple times on videotape, on podcasts. And as far as what LBJ was saying, it was a torrent of profanity. So I'm not going to cuss like LBJ, but just think of every cuss word you can imagine in the book, and he and the Kennedys are tossing that at each other. You blankety blank, you MF, you this, you that, you whatever. Don't you F with me. And then he storms out of the Oval Office about 7 o'clock at night. Because remember, you can't really cuss out the president if all the employees are there and they see it. Okay. That's why they had this big fight at night. He's not going to come in the middle of the day when there are 100 people mingling about, and scream profanity at the president. You're going to do it after hours where there's like maybe one person who can hear this, and that's Secret Service agent Abraham Bolden. And then as Johnson leaves the Oval Office, he's threatening the Kennedys, and then he looks at Abraham Bolden and says, "Who's this boy?" Because boy was they would call black people boy. Who's this boy? And somebody else said, well, he's either an FBI agent or he's a Secret Service agent, but he works for the government. Johnson looked at him and just stormed out of the White House at night, June 29th. LBJ had just come back from Hawaii for a 3-day meeting earlier that week. He got in on Thursday. He went to a national security meeting at 2:30 in the afternoon. He returns and comes back at the night to talk to the Kennedys about Billy Sol Estes. And I'm sure they were talking about the Henry Marshall murder, because the first words that he said when he walked in the Oval Office, this is according to Abraham, okay? Are you guys trying to throw me in jail over some goddamn cotton? Now, Lyndon Johnson's favorite word was goddamn. Now, how do I know this, Francois? Because I read about him I read about LBJ prolifically.
Mm-hmm.
He would use the word goddamn all the time. Goddamn this, goddamn that. Like when he told Madeline, after tomorrow, these goddamn Irish mafia bastards will never embarrass me again. Or when the USS Liberty ship was being sunk, he says, I don't give a damn if that ship sinks and everybody dies on it. Call the airplanes back. He was constantly, if you know Lyndon Johnson, he was always using the word goddamn. That's why when I hear a quote from LBJ and it has the word goddamn in it, it immediately starts to have validity. That's how he talked.
All right.
So that is the importance of Billy Sol Estes. And so you're probably, what probably provoked you to call me was the Cliff Carter tape, I would guess. Because recently on January 14th of 2025, the grandson of Billy Sol Estes goes on the Alex Jones show, and he plays an audio tape, supposedly from 1971, of Billy Sol Estes talking to Cliff Carter, who was extremely close to Lyndon Johnson for 34 years. See, Cliff Carter started volunteering for LBJ in 1937 when he was a 19-year-old kid.
Okay.
And he worked for LBJ very closely as his henchman, bagman, fixer, political director for the next 34 years. And then he died in September of 1971, like just a few months after he made that audio tape. And when he died, his secretary said, Mr. Carter worked himself to death for Lyndon Johnson. She was quoted in the newspaper saying that because Lyndon Johnson would attract people who he would use and abuse and just suck the blood out of as a slave. And it's hard to find people who will work for you as a slave. But LBJ he's kind of like a cult leader. He had a knack of doing that.
Okay.
And so on this tape, which you've heard, basically it's Billy Sol Estes talking to Cliff Carter, and Cliff Carter saying, well, things aren't going well with LBJ right now, who he's known since 1937, mind you. The year is 1971. He's known LBJ for 34 years. We've been having some arguments about the JFK assassination, like, why you had to kill Kennedy. And he says, I really regret taking that order from Lyndon Johnson to pay Mac Wallace to kill John Kennedy. Okay. I don't believe that's how JFK got killed. I want to tell you the importance of this tape. I think Billy Sol Estes and Cliff Carter feared being murdered by Lyndon Johnson. Feared being murdered. Because earlier that year, on January 7th of 1971, Mac Wallace has a car wreck and dies in Pittsburgh, Texas. No, I don't think he was murdered. I think he was an alcoholic. He may have been halfway drunk, and he had a one-man car wreck, and he ran off the road, and he hit something hard, and he died.
Okay.
But for people like Billy Sol Estes and Cliff Carter, who had worked closely with Lyndon Johnson, who knew how incredibly ruthless and heartless and dangerous he was, they could have interpreted the death of Mac Wallace as a murder.
Okay.
And there are a lot of people in Texas who thought, and I believe correctly, that Lyndon Johnson was murdering people left and right. Who were they? In 1952, Sam Smithwick, who was from South Texas, where there was a lot of voting fraud in 1948 to elect Lyndon Johnson, wrote a letter to Coke Stevenson, who LBJ cheated out of the 1948 Democratic senatorial race, and said, come visit me in jail at Huntsville. Huntsville is a East Texas town that holds a prison facility, and I will tell you how LBJ cheated to win. Within 3 weeks of him writing that letter, Sam Smith was found hung in his jail cell with a rope around his neck, and he's sitting on the floor of his bunk, kind of like a two-story bed bunk. He's not hanging from the top. He's sitting on the floor with a rope around his neck or sheets around his neck, and he's dead. You're saying, Robert, how does that prove LBJ did it well? Knowing what I know about the JFK assassination, the Henry Marshall murder, and the USS Liberty murders, that was an LBJ murder. And he said, well, Robert, prove it. Well, I really can't, but the governor of Texas thought that Lyndon Johnson murdered him. And how do we know that, Francois? How do we know that Texas Governor Alan Shivers, who was the governor of Texas at that time, how do we know he thought that Lyndon Johnson murdered Sam Smithwick in jail? How do we know this? Because Lyndon Johnson himself told it to journalist Ronnie Duggar in the White House, who put it in his book called Lyndon B. Johnson, Politician, The Politician. It's in the book.
Okay.
It's Lyndon Johnson saying, And Shivers was telling the media down in San Antonio that I murdered that guy. He said I was a murderer. He said I murdered somebody. That's how the words of LBJ, saying that the governor of Texas thought he was a murderer. Well, I agree with Sam Smith. I agree with Governor Shivers.
Okay.
And I want to thank stupid LBJ for giving us that anecdote with his verbal diarrhea. So that would be in 52. And then we have the 61 Henry Marshall murder. Why would he do that? People say, well, who was Billy Sol Estes? Billy Sol Estes was a bright, industrious, young, and very crooked businessman that Lyndon Johnson hooked up with in the 1950s. And the deal was this. LBJ said, son, I'm going to give you a lot of government contracts. You're going to make a lot of money. And in return for that, you're going to be my ATM machine. Now, this is before we had ATM machines, the little machines where you go get your money from the bank and everything. And anytime I want some money from you, you're going to get your ass down to the LBJ ranch and you're going to bring it to me. You got that, son? And Billy Saul's like, go, all right, just start funneling these government contracts to me. You're the Senate Majority Leader. You can rig this. And rig those government contracts LBJ did.
Okay.
For like building housing or grain storage. They were shipping grain down from Kansas where it should have been stored in a grain silo and storing it in silos in Texas, just so Billy Sol Estes could make money off of this. So how much money did Billy Sol give LBJ? Well, if you read Gus Russo's book, Live by the Sword, Billy Sol Estes told IRS investigator Walt Perry that he gave Lyndon Johnson over $10 million in cash.
Okay.
$10 million in cash then would be the equivalent to $100 million today.
Wow.
Billy Sol Estes was a massive, gushing oil well of money or cash cow for Lyndon Johnson. Usually you have the rich guy outside of government manipulating the politician, kind of like Elon Musk is like a puppeteer of Donald Trump, telling him what to do. I gave you $250 million. I'm going to run the government. I'm running Doge. I'm the boss. You're my little puppet. With LBJ and Billy Sol Estes, it's backwards. It's the politician was controlling the businessman. And anytime Lyndon Johnson wanted money. So in the family of Billy Sol Estes, and among other people who knew him, Estes would say, sometimes Lyndon Johnson would call me at night at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, Saul, because he called him Saul instead of Billy Sol Estes. Saul, I want $500,000. You go to the bank, you get your ass down here, and you have it by 10 o'clock in the morning at the LBJ Ranch. Click. You understand that? Mm-hmm. Not, can you do this? Can you get it to me next week? And so Billy Saul would have to get up in the middle of the night, wake up the local bank president, go get a suitcase, stack $100 bills in a suitcase, hop on a private plane, and fly directly to the hill country, to the LBJ Ranch, and personally give it to Lyndon Johnson. Whenever LBJ wanted it. Immediately. Not like, get it to me in the afternoon. No, get it to me now. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't care. LBJ would call people at night all the time. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Did not matter. He behaved this way for years with his aides, and he would get them involved in a project at 3 o'clock in the morning. Zero care and concern for other people's well-being or their family or their life. All about me. So that's the story of LBJ and Billy Sol Estes. So that's why he had to kill Henry Marshall, because if you're investigating Billy Sol Estes, you're investigating Lyndon Baines Johnson. Mm-hmm. And that's why LBJ, according to Abraham Bolden, the first words out of his mouth when he stormed into the Oval Office on June 29th of 61, not 63, 61, mm-hmm. Are you boys trying to throw me in jail over some goddamn cotton? because Billy Saul was abusing the cotton allotment program, which I'm not going to go into, but it was a agricultural program, you know, that if you let your land go fallow, you got some sort of a cotton credit or something. You got money from the government, and he was buying these rights from farmers and making money off of it. So now we've been at this for an hour, and let's keep going. Okay.
Okay. My question would be,
Yeah.
do you think, we mentioned him already, do you think that Malcolm Wallace killed Kennedy on November the 22nd, 1963?
No.
Okay.
No. Now maybe his fingerprint was up there. Maybe he was helping to facilitate a kill team of anti-Castro Cubans getting up there. Maybe, maybe not. Another thing that Billy Saul Estes used to say, according to Doug Caddy, was, and Clint Peoples, was that Lyndon Johnson would murder people by sending his hitmen on military aircraft and flying them around the country, so they would not have a record, a commercial flight record of where they've been. So if Mac Wallace, who murdered a guy, got a security clearance to work at a defense contractor. That defense contractor was Ling Timco Vault. Ling Timco Vault, owned by D.H. Byrd, the owner of the School Book Depository Building. That's a fact, Francois. I'm not making this up.
Okay.
Mac Wallace, with a murder record, went to work immediately for D.H. Byrd, a close personal friend of Lyndon Johnson. And the Navy investigators who were investigating him did not want to give him a security clearance, and yet magically, mysteriously, like with the wave of a wand, he got it. And that's Lyndon Johnson making it happen behind the scenes, because Lyndon Johnson did that 1,000,000 times in his life. Whatever he wanted, he got it. I'll give you a small anecdote. So here in Austin, in 1943, Lyndon Johnson bought a house called 1901 Dillman. It's a nice part of town now. It's in the Tarrytown area. It's 5 minutes west of the downtown area. It's a very choice place to live then and now. It's a big house. It's like 6,000 square feet or something. I went over there a few years ago and I talked to the owner of the house. He says, when I got here, the electricity we have is a commercial electricity line, not a residential. You're supposed to have a smaller, weaker residential electricity line, but I have a commercial electricity line to this house because Lyndon Johnson had a bunch of air conditioning machines that he wanted to work in top flight conditions. So he ordered the electrical company to make a special favor for him and give him a commercial hookup at a private residence. He pulled tricks like that constantly. You know, behind the scenes, he got whatever he wanted whenever he wanted it. He would go to a tailor, probably the only Arab tailor, only Arab that he knew, and he would get fitted for a suit like in the afternoon, right? 2 o'clock. And then he would tell the tailor, hey, can you have it ready for me by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning? Really? I mean, we're about to get off work at 5. My seamstress is about to go home. And the answer is, well, yes, we can, Mr. President. Yes, we can. And so the seamstress is about to quit. What did you tell him yes for? You want me to stay here all night and work on this suit for Johnson? Yes. So they worked till midnight, tailoring his suit so it would be ready for him the next morning. No thought for other people's family, their private time, their personal life, their well-being. Just, I want my tailored suit immediately. Give it to me now. Just like it would call up Billy Saul Estes. I want my money now. Not wire it to me because somebody can track that. I want it in cash. Go wake up the bank president, get on your effing plane and get down here and give me my money. That's how he rolled, Francois. I read a lot on LBJ. So you're saying, well, how rich was this guy, right? How do we know this? Well, LBJ biographer Robert Caro asked Ed Clark, when Lyndon Johnson became president, what was his net worth? And Ed Clark says, let me check. I got to go check some files here. Goes and checks his files, checks his records, and he comes back and he says to Caro, he was worth $25 million. $25 million in 1963-64 is the equivalent of $258 million today for a guy who was a congressman and a senator and a vice president from 1937 to 1963, 26 years. Where did all this money come from? Just tons and tons of money. Well, it came in the form of suitcases full of money, not little bitty old envelopes. See, you're a pipsqueak politician if you take an envelope full of cash. Lyndon Johnson was taking suitcases full of money. You want $1 billion contract? $1 million in cash for your defense contractor. It's a pretty big contract, isn't it? You want $1 billion contract? I need $1 million in a suitcase. You're going to give it to, I have like 7 bagmen you can give it to, or you can give it to me personally. But give it to Cliff Carter. Give it to John Connolly. Give it to Walter Jenkins. Give it to Jack Valenti. Give it to somebody. You know, you need to make this happen because we're going to be having a vote in the Senate coming up in a month or so if you want this contract. That's how he made that money.
Okay.
So back to Ed. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Ask
I have
your question.
one question. Something
Yes.
is bothering me.
Yes.
Where does Jackie Kennedy fit? Where does she fit? Because my question has always been, if Lyndon Johnson was behind JFK's assassination, how come Jackie Kennedy never got aware of it? No one told her, and she noticed nothing. How come?
Wrong, Francois.
Oh,
you need to read more broadly.
All right.
You need to read Eddie Fisher's autobiography from 1989. Been there, done that. In there, he says he dated Pamela. He dated Pamela Tourneur, who was the press secretary for Jackie Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
On the flight back from Dallas, she turned to Pamela Tourneur and said, quote, "Lyndon Johnson did it," unquote. And Eddie Fisher says, I've never forgotten those words from Pamela. It's in his autobiography. Eddie Fisher was a famous American singer. He used to date Elizabeth Taylor. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He would be kind of like dating Justin Bieber today, or Justin Timberlake. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's in his book. So Jackie knew it in real time, Francois. It's the first words out of her mouth. But why would she know that? Because she knows how much the Kennedys hate LBJ and how much he hates them, and that they're going to get rid of him. Now, on that same ride back from Dallas was JFK's secretary of 12 years, Evelyn Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
She took an envelope on that plane, turned it over, and wrote down a list of 7 suspects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
At the top of the list, it said Lyndon. She's in the photo of LBJ being sworn in. Jackie's in the photo of LBJ being sworn in. They both thought, Francois, in real time, that Lyndon Johnson did it. Okay? In real time. So don't tell me she didn't figure it out. She knew it.
Okay, then I remember watching the JFK movie, and there was, a character, Dean Andrews, and at some point he's talking to what's his name, Jim Garrison, and there's one question he says, why didn't his brother prosecute him? He was his brother, for Christ's sake. Why didn't Bobby prosecute him? Because he was his brother. And that's what he says. Why didn't RFK prosecute Lyndon Johnson if he was aware that he was behind his brother's murder?
Francois, immediately after the JFK assassination, Robert Kennedy was politically castrated. He had no power within the Johnson administration to do anything whatsoever.
Okay.
J. Edgar Hoover quit taking his phone calls. He used to have a phone line in Hoover's office that Robert Kennedy could call him anytime he wanted to. Hoover immediately started ignoring Robert Kennedy and never called him and never talked to him. How about that? You're the head of the Justice Department. Surely the FBI director is working under you, and he's going to, no. It's like, goodbye, go to hell, I hate you, and nobody's going to talk to you. So he had no power. Doesn't matter. You're the attorney general. What are you going to do? Nothing. And he was psychologically devastated. And also he blamed himself for for having JFK killed. And also he immediately suspected LBJ did it. Immediately. And what are you going to do in launching a public investigation? We're launching an investigation of the JFK assassination. I'm going to be leading it. No, he thought they didn't have Francois. They didn't have proof that LBJ did it. But they saw his behavior on Air Force One on the way back when he was in the bathroom and he's hysterical and he's rocking back and forth and he's saying, conspiracy, conspiracy. We're all going to get killed, conspiracy. And they thought he was just a bullshitter and a play actor. And they knew they were going to get rid of him. And suddenly their boy JFK is dead in Dallas. And they weren't buying that for 1 minute. Okay. So you'll hear other JFK researchers like Lisa P say, well, Lyndon thought he was going to be attacked or he was in danger. And the reply to that is Evelyn Lincoln and Jackie Kennedy saw LBJ's behavior in real time and immediately thought he did it. Okay. And not only that, we have a record of his behavior on the way back from Dallas by Air Force Steward Doyle Whitehead, who was on the airplane. He said LBJ drank about half a fifth of Cutty Sark, which is a cheap ass, whiskey. And half a fifth is equivalent to like 10 or 12 drinks. Like, mix me one up. All right, give me another one. Give me another one. Give me another one. And he said the Johnson people were laughing and celebrating and saying what they were going to do when they get back to D.C. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. They're already planning out their administration. And they were in a good mood. And even on Air Force Two, I promise this to you, we have a Kennedy aide that was on Air Force Two, which LBJ was on, right? And she said that the Johnson people were happy.
Oh, wow.
I can give you a document. I have the woman's name, okay, in my files. She was on Antiques Roadshow, and that's a TV show in America. And she had that anecdote there. They were happy. So the Johnson people were happy. So so after the assassination, Jackie Kennedy and Robert Kennedy gave a lot of interviews with author William Manchester, who wrote the book Death of a President. And they were saying a lot of nasty things about Lyndon Johnson. And then when they saw the manuscript of the book, the Kennedy aides were reading it for them, like Richard Goodman was reading it for him, John Siegenthaler was reading it for him, somebody else was reading it for him, Arthur Schlesinger was reading it for him. And they said, this manuscript sends out the subliminal message that Lyndon Johnson killed John Kennedy. And it had a lot of incredibly negative stuff said about LBJ by the Kennedys. Jackie sued William Manchester to take all that out and keep it secret. And the Manchester revisions have been locked away for 50 years. I think they leaked out and appeared in the media back then, so we know what it said, Okay. And so that's why they had a big fight with William Manchester. They wanted to censor all the awful things they were saying about Lyndon Johnson. So you asked me originally, why didn't Robert Kennedy's attorney? Robert Kennedy immediately has no power under Lyndon Johnson, none whatsoever. And the head of the FBI hates his guts and will do nothing for him, except report back to LBJ on what he's doing. Now, did you know that Lyndon Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover were neighbors, Francois?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Did you know that both men hated the guts of John and Robert Kennedy? Did you know that?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay, well, there's a book you ought to get by Burton Hirsch. I think it says Bobby and J. Edgar.
Okay.
And it goes into detail about the hatred and dislike they had for each other. And there's another companion book you can read called Mutual Contempt by Jeff Sheshel. and that goes over the hatred of Robert Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. A whole book on that. Mutual
Okay.
Contempt by Jeff Sheshel and Bobby and Jay Yeager for Burton Hirsch. One about the hatred of Hoover and the Kennedys, one about hatred of LBJ and the Kennedys.
Okay, that is interesting. I'll definitely look them up. Okay, but my question will be now. Okay, granted, everything you've said, fascinating. I mean, fascinating. But let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What was Lee Harvey Oswald's role? What did he do, according to you, on November 22nd?
Pre-selected CIA patsy for the JFK assassination.
Okay.
I'm gonna give you a broad answer. Okay. The people who are the lone nutters, no offense to you if you're still one or whatever, people like Posner, where they really fail majestically is actually thinking that Lee Harvey Oswald was an actual pro-Castro Marxist when he was anything but that. That is a massive failure. Lee Harvey Oswald, according to people like me, was lying about who he was. He was spying on the left. He was a fake defector to Russia. We have a lot of circumstantial evidence that proves that. And when he came back to America, he was faking being a Marxist activist, faking being pro-Castro. He was joining Fair Play Cuba to undermine it. In the meantime, he's reading James Bond books. We have many records where many witnesses that he liked John Kennedy. Why are you going to shoot somebody that you like? He liked him. He called him the best president of his lifetime. The source on that is Michael Payne. Paul Gregory, who knew him and thinks he killed John Kennedy, admits that Oswald liked Kennedy. George de Mohrenschildt and his wife, Jean or Joanne or what her name is, said Oswald liked John Kennedy. Marina has said constantly for 62 years, my husband was a fan of John Kennedy. For all these sources, it'd be like, being a fan of Taylor Swift and then killing her. Why would you do that? You'd want to kill somebody else. So here's the big evidence that I want to mention very importantly. Lee Harvey Oswald was framed for the JFK assassination, and we can prove it by the Dallas police dispatcher audio tapes of 11/22/63. They immediately start looking for a guy who's 5'10", 165 pounds with brown hair and blue eyes. That is in the police transcripts. And they push that out starting at 12:44 p.m. and they continue that 4 more times for the next 25 minutes. So from 12:44 to 1:09 p.m. they give that description out 5 times, Francois, 5 times. Where does it come from? No, it did not come from Howard Brennan. He's lying. No, it did not. Yeah, that's a fantasy. The Dallas police were lying about that. Where did it come from? We know exactly where it came from, Francois. It came from 1960 in April when Dallas FBI agent John Fain interviewed Marguerite Oswald. And Marguerite was concerned. My son's gone to Russia. We don't know why. What's going on? Tell us. You tell us. And he says, well, give us a description of your son, Francois. And she said, well, my son Lee is 5 foot 10 inches tall, 165 pounds. That's where that came from, Francois, not Howard Brennan. They had that in the document. They had that in the files on Lee Harvey Oswald, and they set him up. That same description is also in an INS document on Oswald from 61. INS is Immigration and Naturalization Service. That exact same description, 5'10", 165 pounds, brown hair, slender, is in a CIA document dated October 10th, 1963. I'm not making this up. So from my point of view, people in U.S. intelligence are manipulating the Dallas police, because I don't think the Dallas police can pull up the CIA documents or the FBI documents. They're getting a description of Oswald that will plausibly match him immediately so that when they pick him up and kill him, they can blame the JFK assassination on him.
Okay, well, that is coherent.
Wait. That is coherent. Okay. So for people who think that Howard Brennan looked up there and saw Oswald standing and said, "Wow, he's 165, or he's between 160 and 170 pounds," that's all a big fat lie, made up by the Dallas police, who were involved in the framing of Oswald. And guess what else? Guess what else that means, Francois? Because we've proven that Oswald was being set up, being framed immediately. You can't trust anything else the Dallas police does on that case for the rest of the case. You can't trust them on Tippit. You can't trust them on General Evan Walker. You can't trust them on anything. They are in on the plot. They're framing that boy immediately using what? The physical description of his own mother in the John Fane memo. She was interviewed in April of 1960. The John Fane memo is dated May the 12th of 60. But you want to hear something funny, Francois? The John Fane memo is attached to the Warren Report. It's in the Warren Report. You can look it up. Go to the Mary Farrell Foundation. Look up the John Fane memo of May 12th. I can give it to you. May 12th of 1960. It's in the Warren Report. Now, the Dallas police dispatch transcripts are not in the Warren Report. That's been out since probably the early 1970s. And people started reading that and said, 5'10" and 165 pounds, where did it come from? They said it was Brennan. Then they see Marguerite's description of her own son. You see? That's why I can't trust the Dallas police on the Tippit murder or the General Evan Walker shooting or anything else they did in this case.
But you mean it is in the Warren Report, or I can read it from the Warren Report?
Yes, 100% yes.
One of the volumes or the report itself?
I think it's in the 26 volumes. You can find them online. I can give you on my blog. I have it listed there. If I can give you the link after this, and you can look it for yourself. Yes.
All right, I'll do that. Now, a question, a very important question. I was going to mention that, but you did mention it in passing. But I want to stress that point. I can understand Oswald being framed for the Walker shooting. I mean, there is absolutely no picture, no video, no witness. It was in the evening, so he can be blamed for that. Okay, I can understand that. He can be framed, I mean. But what about the Tippit shooting? I mean, who killed Tippit if not Oswald? Because there were witnesses there, and some people recognized him in the lineup, in the police headquarters.
Well, that's a good question.
Ted Calloway, for example, didn't he recognize Oswald?
There are multiple witnesses who think they saw Oswald, who said they saw Oswald, who didn't see Oswald there.
Oh, okay.
They're all wrong, and they're all being steered and manipulated by the Dallas police, who I have proven are corrupted from 12:44 p.m. As soon as you start looking for a guy 5'10", 165 pounds that matches Oswald's physical description from his own mother, you are in on the JFK assassination. You are in on the cover of the JFK assassination. Your transcribing of witness testimony is not legit. And besides, Helen Markham said the shooting occurred at 106 or 107. You're aware of that, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you why she's so sure about that. Because she was at her apartment in the laundry room of her apartment at 1:04 p.m. She says, I've got to go catch my 112 bus, not my 115 bus, my 112 bus. She immediately starts walking. The FBI later timed her walk. That's why she was so cocksure in her Warren Commission testimony that it was 106, 107. She was sure, 106 or 107. How do you know? Well, the FBI timed it, you know. From my laundry room at my apartment, it's a 2-minute walk at a normal pace to 10th and Patton, where I saw Tippit being shot. Okay. And so that's why I don't believe the timeline, but I don't want to go into the Tippit murder because we could spend 2 hours talking about that. So what I'm trying to say is that normally in a non-corrupt situation, I would believe 5 or 10 witnesses. You understand that? I would say, yeah, they got him. But once I've been convinced in my mind that Dallas police are completely corrupt by 5'10", 165 pounds, I immediately assumed they are manipulating witness testimony, and they had a rigged lineup, and Oswald in real time was complaining about the lineup, and
He did.
and he did.
He was
Okay, and,
yeah.
if you look at the picture of the lineup, he looked nothing like all the other people. So I think that the Tippit killing occurred earlier rather than later.
Okay.
And Oswald could not have been there. And I completely discount the witness testimony because I don't trust the Dallas police. I don't care what they say. They weren't that close. She was the closest one. I think she ended up identifying him, but she was hysterical about it. So let's just pass on that. Okay.
All right. Fine. What was
Yeah.
Jack Ruby's role?
Jack Ruby was visited the most by Dallas Mafia, by the guy that owned the pizza joint, not Joseph Velo. Who's the guy below Joseph Velo? There was another mafia guy who was visiting Oswald. So my theory is that Lyndon Johnson murdered Lee Harvey Oswald, and they used the local mafia as a cutout. And you better believe crooked politicians and intelligence people know mafia figures. Okay, they know the underworld. And, for example, H.L. Hunt knew all kinds of underworld crooks. Now, you say, Robert, how do you know that? H.L. Hunt in the 1950s and 60s was the nation's largest illegal gambler. And the mafia was running the gaming in America. Do you understand that? So he's dealing with the mafia when he's making these huge gargantuan bets on football games in America. I'm not saying Hunt killed Oswald. I mean, I'll say that LBJ set him up, and he used the Dallas police and the local mafia to do it. And by the way, Francois, Jack Ruby thought Lyndon Johnson murdered John Kennedy. You know that, don't you?
No, I wasn't aware of that either.
Well, okay, and I can prove it to you. Okay, he said that John Kennedy should have picked Adlai Steven to be president.
Yeah.
And then in a private letter that he sent out, he called Lyndon Johnson a Nazi of the worst order, and thought he was behind. Okay,
that's where I remember the sentence.
So here's where we're at. Ruby says LBJ did it. Jackie says it. Evan Lincoln says it. Robert Kennedy thought it. You live in France. Charles de Gaulle was convinced it was a conspiracy and a domestic conspiracy.
That is true.
And then we're not done yet. Hold on, we're not done yet. And the KGB internally concluded by 1965 that Lyndon Johnson did it. Are you aware of that?
Who did you say?
The Soviet KGB.
Oh, the Soviet KGB. Okay.
Well, are you aware of that?
I wasn't. Well, maybe I read that, but I don't remember. I don't.
Well, I'm here to help you because you're a lone nutter, and I want to help. I want to help my boy out here. So Hoover wrote it out. You said, Robert, how do you know? By the way, Francois, everything I'm telling you on this little podcast, I can document. Okay.
All right. I know that.
Yeah. And so, so the reason we know the KGB had concluded LBJ did it was because on December 1st of 1966, J. Edgar Hoover sends a memo to Lyndon Johnson, and in it he says, the KGB thinks you killed Kennedy. And they've concluded this by September of 1965. And we know because we have a source inside the KGB residency in New York City. And he says the KGB has sent out a worldwide alert to all their sources. What is the relationship between Lyndon Johnson and the Kennedys? Because we are now in possession of information that Lyndon Johnson killed John Kennedy. That is in Hoover's memo. That memo did not come public until the Assassinations Record Review Board. It came public in 1996 or 97.
Okay.
I'm just helping you out, my friend.
Yeah.
That's why I think he did it, because if the KG thought it, and all the people around Lyndon Johnson thought it, Madeline Brown thought it, Billy Celestis thought it, Bar McClellan thought it. So back to Ed Clark, because I don't mean to leave him out, okay? I'll be brief. Bar McClellan wrote a book called Blood, Money, and Power. It came out in 2003. Yeah. Bar is much of that book is
somewhere here.
Yeah, much of that book is inaccurate.
Oh, okay.
Barr at that time was not a very good JFK assassination researcher. He has Oswald shooting the president. He has Oswald being a communist. The book is Faction, which is a combination of fiction and true stuff. But the most important thing in that book that Barr speaks for is that 3 lawyers in Ed Clark's law firm told him that Ed Clark, and by extension LBJ, were behind the JFK assassination. That's from Barr's personal experiences. I don't think he's making it up. The year is 2025. I've known Barr for 17 years. I talk to him once a week.
Oh, okay.
He's 85 years old. His wife died last year. He lives in Gulfport, Mississippi. He's in an assisted living facility. You know, his mind is still there. He's a good guy. But those 3 people who told Barr that Ed Clark was involved was, number 1, Ed Clark himself, okay, bragging about it. Number 2, Don Thomas, one of the absolute closest friends of LBJ for 30 years. Don Thomas was the guy who would launder all of LBJ's dirty money. So if you gave LBJ $3 or $4 million in cash or $500,000 in cash, Don Thomas would do the paperwork and help LBJ buy some real estate. And suddenly LBJ owns all this real estate in Central Texas that used to be cash given to him by defense contractors, oil men, or Billy Sol Estes. Don Thomas, according to Waddy Bullion, who was an investment advisor of Lyndon Johnson, was the closest person on earth to Lyndon Johnson except for Lady Bird.
Okay.
Total insider. Barr McClellan used to ride around Texas in a car with Don Thomas for years, chit-chatting, talking, buddies, pals, friends. Barr was a very smart, up-and-coming oil and gas lawyer. He was the guy, if you're in the oil and gas industry and you want a smart, young, motivated lawyer to save you money and make you money, you hired Barr McClellan, the mid-1960s. So when Barr says he was a lawyer for Lyndon Johnson, that's not really true. He was a lawyer at the law firm that worked for Lyndon Johnson, and he was a lawyer who knew 2 of Lyndon Johnson's closest friends, Ed Clark and Don Thomas, very, very well. And Barr will tell me that he said Don Thomas was a prince, meaning a great guy. Loved hanging out with him, because remember, they might have a case in Dallas, and so you got to drive from Austin to Dallas, and you're talking, right? So one time they went to get barbecue and they pulled off the side of the road, and Don Thomas said, if the truth be told, you know, I was involved in the 1948 ballot stuffing for LBJ down in South Texas, and as for Dallas, Clark took care of it. That's as bad as Cliff Carter saying we used Mac Wallace to kill Kennedy, which I don't believe. I don't want to go into it, because I think that it was an assassination squad coming out of Miami or New Orleans of anti-Castro Cubans being used by General Edward Lansdale, who had worked at Miami's JM Wave station, or who had worked in Operation Mongoose. That's my opinion.
Okay, well, in that case, let me jump on that. The firing sequence, how many shots from where, according to you?
According to me, I think JFK was hit in the head from the front and from the back simultaneously.
Okay.
I didn't used to think that. I used to think it was a grassy knoll shot. But if you look at the skull x-rays, you see a debris trail that seems to be coming. It's on the left side of JFK's head, but it came from the right. So it's all these particles in the upper part of his head. This is the left side of my head. Like a bullet coming in here and leaving a debris trail in the top part. And then you see, you know, according to witnesses, many witnesses, a huge blowout hole in the back middle of his head. I used to think that that was a blowout from the front. Now I'm thinking it's an entrance from the back and maybe a blowout from the front. I don't know.
Okay.
So that's one or two. JFK gets shot in the throat. That's 3. JFK gets shot in the back. That's 4. I'm not a magic bullet believer, so I believe in a separate bullet for John Connally. That's 5. James Tague almost gets hit. That's 6. So a minimum of 6 shots.
Okay.
Where do I think they came from? Texas School Book Depository, controlled by LBJ's good friend D.H. Byrd, who made a massive amount of money on the Vietnam War, and maybe a pair of snipers on the grassy knoll. Like, I think on the 6th floor, Francois, there were 2 sets of snipers, east window, west window.
Oh, okay.
You've probably never seen the west window before. A photo of it that was taken at the time of the assassination. It's wide ass open. The western window, wide open, like both windows up. Like, come shoot the president right here. You can't miss him. Not the east window, the so-called Oswald window, which I think was a sniper there too, by the way. Okay. Because the reason I think that, people saw the gun, not just Howard Brennan. People saw guns sticking out that window. The boys on the 5th floor heard shells dropping down right above them. There was a shooter in that window.
Okay.
Of course, you know, it's only cracked a foot. Have you been to the 6th floor museum ever?
Yes.
Okay. And you see how small that crack in the window is, right? You see how low it is, number one, right? So Howard Brennan says Oswald is standing. What's he going to do? Identify Oswald by his kneecap? You lying SOB? Come on, man. So there was a sniper in that window. Sure there was, because people like Bob Jackson, I think, saw a rifle out of it. Of course there was a sniper in the window. Were there snipers in the western window? Yeah. You know, there is a witness, Arnold Rowland, who says, I saw a guy in the far western window and a guy in the far eastern window. And the guy in the far eastern window was dark complected and skinny. I don't know how you could tell that. It's only cracked a foot wide, Arnold. But whatever. It makes me think that there were any Castro Cubans. Now, I'm going to give you something that's going to absolutely prove that the JFK assassination was a conspiracy. Are you ready? Okay. Dark complected man, also known as walkie-talkie man, also known as radio man, the guy standing next to umbrella man, was a spotter for snipers on the grassy knoll. And I've got absolute proof about this.
Okay.
Absolute proof. If you look at the photos of him, as JFK's limo is approaching, if you look at the Willis photo and the Croft film, and you pull out the frames, or maybe the Bronson film, he is standing. Can the viewer see this? He is standing with his right arm and right fist in front of his belly button. Okay, like this. Dark complected man, I'll call him walkie-talkie man, is standing like this at Zapruder 200 or 202. Now, you can't see that in Zapruder 200, 202, or 204. You have to estimate it's Zapruder 202 by looking at the Croft film and the Willis film. Okay, and by the location of JFK's limo, that's how you can tell. You understand that? Where's his limo in the Zapruder film? Where is it in the Willis film? Well, if you look at the Willis film or the photo, it appears to be Zapruder 202. Okay?
Okay.
All right. You can go online. You can look at every frame of the Zapruder film. There are websites that have that. By Zapruder 226, walkie-talkie man, you can see it clearly has raised his right arm high. You see this? Right arm. The arm that used to be down here, a fist. What happens in between those 24 frames? That's a second and a half. JFK takes a shot. Let me use some math here. So it's Zapruder 226, arm way up. We know that for a fact. We estimate it's Zapruder 202, fist in front of his stomach. Zapruder film 18.3 frames a second, 18.3 divided by 1.3 seconds. We know that walkie-talkie man has raised his arm in those 1.3 seconds, and that JFK has taken a bullet at that exact same time. The first shot on JFK occurred right then. Dark complected man is standing in the street, Francois. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, I
No, no,
thought
no,
it
no,
was
no,
on the
no, 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 no.
grass.
No, he's not standing on the sidewalk.
Okay.
He's standing off the sidewalk. He's
Okay.
in the little gutter next to the street.
Oh, really? Okay.
You have to look at the Willis and the Croft film or the Bronson film. You will see that. He has a bird's eye view of the limo. And directly behind him, 50 yards, directly behind him is the fence on the grassy knoll where snipers are waiting for a hand signal.
All right. Okay.
And so,
Okay.
I'm trying to tell you that it is a fact that he raised his arm in that time period.
Mhm.
A fact that goes from why are you standing in the street, walkie-talkie man, with your hand in a fist in front of your belly button? Why? Nobody else is doing that. Why? Indigestion? Most people, when the president comes by, they clap,
Mhm.
they wave, maybe some go a little bit higher, or they shoot the birdie, or
Who
they
did that?
what? Who did
Who?
that?
Yeah.
Oh, well, not at Dallas. I'm talking about
Oh, okay.
presidents in
Oh,
general.
okay.
Or you hold a sign for your guy or a sign against your guy. Nobody stands around in the middle of the street wearing a beret. Do you know the history of the beret, Francois? It is militarily associated. Just Google.
Yeah. Well, yes, it is.
No, it is. It's a fact. Google, is the beret associated with military people? Yes. We have the green berets. We have the red berets. It started with the Basque region of France, or Spain. The beret did. And it's been adopted by militaries around the world. And Walkie-Talkie Man is wearing a beret, and he raises his hand at the exact same moment that John Kennedy is taking a shot. There is your absolute proof that there's a conspiracy in the JFK assassination, and that there were snipers behind Walkie-Talkie Man, and that Walkie-Talkie Man was a spotter for snipers.
Okay. Thank you for that. Very little time left. I need to ask you a few questions. What do you think of David Lifton's theory, or his book, or himself?
David Lifton is a very important JFK researcher because he interviewed the people in Dallas who put JFK into a casket, and interviewed the people in Bethesda who opened up a different casket that was dramatically different. That was a shipping container casket. And that implies that somebody has grabbed John Kennedy's body from the very fancy casket that he was put into in Dallas. For what reason, only God knows.
Okay.
That's important. I want to skip the body alteration.
Okay.
I think David Lifton was a very smart man who believes some crazy stuff.
Okay.
It just happens that way. I do not think that people are going down in the bottom of Air Force One and taking bullets out of JFK. I think that when the body got to Bethesda before Jackie Kennedy did, and they went in there and pulled out a few bullets to minimize the amount of shooters, do a little bit of quick cleanup work, and then they had a second autopsy. So I believe in a very briefly pre-autopsy, and then the formal autopsy later. That's what I believe in.
Okay. Thank you for that. What do you think of Jim Fetzer's theory of an altered Zapruder film?
I don't believe in it.
Okay.
I don't want to go into that. I consider Zapruder film to be mainly legit. I think at one point that somebody cut a few frames out of it for whatever reason. And there are people like Robert Groden and Paul Kangas of San Francisco that have a complete copy of it, meaning a full Zapruder film without the frames being eliminated. So I don't want to argue that because that's not important to me.
Okay.
I'm more focused on the who and the why, as opposed to the how. And I've given you a heavy dose of that. Yeah.
I understand that. Yeah, I thought it was important to ask you the question. What do you think of John Armstrong, Harvey and Lee's theory, of the two Oswalds?
Okay. John Armstrong's a very intelligent man who,
Uh-huh.
like David Lifton, is a very intelligent man, and they often sometimes believe crazy things. And so no way was that true. Now, when Oswald was in Russia, somebody in New Orleans was using his identity. Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
like identity theft. It doesn't mean there's a guy who's identical to Lee Harvey Oswald walking around. They just used his name to rent a vehicle or something. I forget what it was, but he
Mm-hmm.
was probably being impersonated in New Orleans,
Mm-hmm.
but not a body double. So I think it's a crazy. There's a guy named on Education Forum. There's a guy named Carl Kanaski, and he's recently been posting on this. And he says if you read Robert Oswald's book Lee,
Mm-hmm.
it totally debunks what John Armstrong is saying. So apparently John Armstrong never read that book, and suddenly you will not believe in two Oswalds and two Marguerites if you read that book. And I'm not going to go into details why, but Carl Kanaski has done that.
All
Can I
right.
say?
Okay.
Can I say one more? I'll let you ask another question, but hold on.
No, go ahead. I'm listening to you.
I left out something incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Oswald's book
Mm-hmm.
has the most important information on Lee Harvey Oswald you will ever hear.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the most important thing I've ever read. He says Lee was absolutely obsessed with the supremely anti-communist TV show I Led Three
Mm-hmm.
Lives, the story of Herbert Philbrick. Okay, and he watched every episode that he could. Probably watched 100 or 200 or however many there was. The TV show ran from like 1953 to 56. Oswald's watching it every day. Okay, obviously he's identifying with the government and not the communists. Every episode on that TV show was a Herbert Philbrick type character. Herbert Philbrick's a hardcore FBI informer, right winger, anti-communist who infiltrates a local communist ring every TV show and then reports them to the government, and they all get arrested and the country is saved. It happens again and again and again and again and again. That's the theme for every single TV show. Okay. So that's who Oswald wanted to be. He wanted to work in counterintelligence. He wanted to catch communists. His two older brothers were Marines. He's
Mm-hmm.
obsessed with a TV show that's FBI approved. So, Francois, in the 1950s, in the middle of the Red Scare, the FBI is in charge of catching communists,
Mm-hmm.
and the U.S. Marines are in charge of killing communists. And that's who Oswald wanted to be, either catch them or kill them. And so I believe he was a fake
Okay.
defector to Russia. All this bit about him being a ideological Marxist is garbage. When he so-called defected, he gave an interview and he says, well, I indoctrinated myself. He used
Oh.
that word.
Mm-hmm.
That is a negative connotation. That's what a right winger would say about a Marxist. Oh, it's Marxist indoctrination. So he used that word. That makes me think he's a anti-communist. He's obsessed with an anti-communist TV show. Do I believe his public comments about, oh, I got a flyer about the Rosenbergs and I started reading up on Marxism and I converted? Just a pile of garbage. If you go to the John Fay memo that I talked to you about, sorry, my voice is messed up, from May of 1960,
Mm-hmm.
the Dallas FBI agent says, Marguerite and Robert Oswald, do you have any notion of Oswald's communist inclinations? And they said, no. What are you talking about? He never did this. I mean, I have no idea what you're talking about. So Oswald came from a conservative Southern family whose older brothers in the Marines are his idols. And his other idol is a supremely anti-communist character on a TV
Mm-hmm.
show called I Led Three Lives. So no, he's
Mm-hmm.
not a commie, and he was set up on the JFK assassination.
Okay. Why do you think that the well cons- the Kennedy assassination research community hasn't been more unified or over the decades, over the last decades?
Um, look, um, it's very normal for a controversial political event to have many separate analyses of it.
Mm-hmm.
They are unified on one thing, except for the lone nutters, on one thing only. the JFK assassination was a conspiracy from America, and the United States government is covering it up. That's about it. Because then at that point they'll say, you know, the three main groups, the three main theories are the CIA or the military did it over the issue of Vietnam, or JFK's foreign policy. That's the top theory. The one that's rivals that, that's getting up there, that's very strong in public consciousness is that a lone nut killed JFK. There was no conspiracy. That's a very strong popular belief set among people who are white male men and highly educated.
Okay.
I've found that out over the years. If you have 1 or 2 or 3 college degrees and you're a white male, you're susceptible to believing that a lone nut killed JFK.
Okay.
And everybody else is more susceptible to believing a conspiracy. And the other lesser belief set is that LBJ did it, which is gaining traction. And the one below that would be the mafia did it. But why would the government bend over backwards and cover up a mafia murder of JFK? I just don't get it. Those are the main theories. All the other ones, like Fidel Castro did it, that's very minor. The Russians did it, very minor. The Federal Reserve did it, very, very minor. And there are other micro theories out there, but the big ones are the ones we just talked about. Lone nutters, CIA did it over Vietnam, or LBJ did it for personal reasons. And the fourth one would be the mafia did it. Those are the big 4.
Okay. Okay. What do you think of James Files?
I think he is a pathological liar.
Okay.
And practically everything he says is a lie. And I don't think that he bit a hot shell from a gun. I mean, you shoot a gun, the shell's hot. And you're going to bite that and you're going to stick that on the fence? No. Okay. So he's a pathological. Keep asking me these softballs. Keep going.
Okay, but have you ever met him or talked to him?
Yes, on the grassy knoll. Yes.
Oh, really?
He was wearing a MAGA hat. He's a big Trump guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's a nice enough guy, pathological liar, and I don't want to talk about him anymore because I don't believe it. Keep going. Ask me about Judith Berry Baker.
Yeah, I was going to.
Okay. Have you ever met her personally?
I have met her, yes. Well, once I went there for the 50th anniversary, and
yes.
She was there. She was there probably for the Lancer conference. She was selling books.
Yep. Okay, so here's my take on Judy. I'm not saying it's a correct take. It's just my take, okay? She worked at the O'Reilly Coffee Company with Oswald. She knew him. She very likely had an affair with him. She seems to be incredibly emotionally attached to him. And she is told an astronomical amount of lies relating to that. And I can't figure out what is true and what is a lie.
Okay.
That's where I'm at.
Okay.
And she used to teach creative writing or take creative writing. And a lot of her book, Me and Lee, is just a bunch of BS creative writing. And she is so desperate to absolve her former boyfriend that she will do or say anything to do that, even if she's lying.
Okay.
She's intelligent. So you can be intelligent and she's a damaged person. And I don't know what has damaged her. She's a fairly nice person. Nice, intelligent, damaged. She will pout if you don't defend her. She said to me, "Well, you don't defend me." Well, Judy, I don't believe everything you said, sweetheart. Okay, I'm not going to go into what I believe and I don't believe. I have a hard time figuring out what you're saying is true and not true. And so I will leave that as my commentary on Judith Berry Baker.
Okay. On a personal level, do you know Deborah Conway?
Yeah.
I heard, probably, I don't remember where I heard that she's ill. Isn't she ill?
I think Deborah Conway has memory issues. I don't know if it's yes, and I think it's something akin to Alzheimer's, where you just start forgetting stuff. And it was getting to be pretty bad a couple of years ago, and I understand that it's gotten worse.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry
I
to
would
hear
say,
that.
I'm not a doctor. I would say that it's early onset Alzheimer's. It's the kind of thing that you can remember stuff from years ago, but you forget where you put your car keys 5 minutes ago. And I think it's gotten worse and worse. And I don't think she really understands the JFK assassination. One time on her website, she said JFK got killed because of civil rights and the move to peace, meaning, the militarist and the government killed him. And she left out LBJ's personal reasons. I think she's did a great service to the community by having
Hmm.
those
She
conferences for
did.
decades, because I've learned a lot from those conferences. So I want to give her a gold star and a shout out for that.
Hmm.
And they need to put those conferences for free on YouTube. And they
I'd
haven't
love
done
that.
that yet. No, they need to put that for anybody can access that and quit selling it, because there were incredible conferences for 20 years she did that need to be available to everybody. Lots of great presentations. All right, what's the next question for you got for me, my friend?
Are you a friend of Robert Groden's?
I'm a friend of Robert Groden, and I think he's one of the great JFK assassination researchers of all time. And he also does not believe the Zapruder film was altered, and he's the world's expert on the film and photography of the JFK assassination.
Hmm.
And he's a good guy. Any questions about him? Or
Well, from my standpoint, you are a Kennedy assassination researcher from Texas, and
Yep.
he is a Kennedy assassination researcher from Texas. So, from my standpoint, you're friends. I mean, you know.
Well, no, they're enemies too here, but I want to go into that. But he has a friend named Marshall Evans, who you probably never met, who is highly not, yeah, you never talked to him. He is a close friend of Robert Groden. They used to work together. And Marshall's been having some medical issues of his own lately, past couple of years, but he's extremely knowledgeable about the JFK
Okay.
assassination. Another JFK researcher you probably don't know about is Rachel Rendish of Greenville, Texas. These people go way back. See, they knew Marina, they knew Madeline, they met Billy Saul Estes, they met James Tague, they met Bar McClellan. They've been on the ground and they're not known. Marshall Evans is like a guru on the J. He had a book, and I forgot what it's called, but it's Marshall with one L, Marshall Evans. And in his book, you ought to get it because he debunks a lot of baloney conspiracy
Hmm.
theories in it. You would like it if you're a lone nutter. You'd like it because there's a lot of BS floating around. That's why I like the Lone Nutters at Education Forum. I want them on there because there's so many people who are so-called conspiracy theorists who believe the craziest things, and I like having you guys there debunking it.
Hmm.
Even though I don't agree with your overall take on the assassination, I want you there to debunk everybody else.
Okay. You have said so many things. I mean, it will take time for me to digest everything. Um, my last question will be: there is some rather modern, not modern, but recent controversy about what's his nickname? There was
Prayer Man.
yeah, Prayer Man. I was thinking
Yeah,
about
I don't
Prayer Man
believe
now.
Oswald was standing on the front steps of the school book depository building.
Hmm.
I think that was that other guy that looks like him. I forgot his name. Wearing a flannel T-shirt or flannel
Hmm.
shirt, I think. But Prayer Man, I don't follow. I stick generally to the big picture. But when I find something micro like Dark Complected Man, I get really excited. But how
Yeah.
about this, Francois? A good way for you to do this is review this video and ask me for documentation on the
Oh
key
yes, I'll do.
points.
Hmm.
Because you want, let's give you documentation so I'm not making it up. And by the way, this is what I've learned. Just because something is documented doesn't mean it's true, right?
Okay.
I can document so that I can say that Madeline Brown said this. I can document she said that. It doesn't mean she said it was true. By the way, the 1121 Murchison Party never happened.
Oh, okay.
That's a fantasy. But
Okay.
what did happen was,
But she,
yeah,
Madeleine Brown would talk about it in documentaries.
and she's lying.
Okay.
But what's true is that at the Driscoll Hotel on 12/31/63, Lyndon Johnson told her that it was the fat cats of Dallas
Mm-hmm.
and renegade intelligence bastards that killed John Kennedy. And Lyndon Johnson is proven to have been at the Driscoll Hotel on 12/31/63 by contemporary press reports and by his daily presidential schedule. See, that's why I believe that.
Okay.
And the Murchison Party didn't happen because LBJ and JFK got into Fort Worth at 11:05 p.m. at night, and then they drove in a motorcade to the Texas Hotel and were photographed at 11:30 at night with thousands of people waiting for them. And there's no way LBJ got in a car and drove 45 minutes to Clinton Murchison's home in North Dallas and then drove back and then got up in the morning to be there for JFK's speech outside in the morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. That just did not happen. It's a fantasy.
All right, fair enough. Okay. Okay, fine.
Yep.
Well, okay. It's been 2 hours. We have to
Yep.
wrap up at some point, but I want
Let's
to
wrap.
tell
Let's
you
wrap.
some.
Yeah. Go ahead and ask me a question or two, and let's wrap it. Yep.
Well, no, I was going to say I don't have any more questions right now, because I think I wanted to thank you for this I said fascinating. It's very interesting, very interesting. I mean, when you talked about so many things, and the general presentation that you gave, and then the answers that you gave to my questions, I'm very satisfied. I'm very happy, and I really think it was a very high quality conversation, and I want to thank you for that.
Hey,
I mean, it's interesting. I could go on listening to you.
Well, I want to tip my hat to hundreds or thousands of other JFK assassination researchers
Okay.
who I'm getting this from.
Mm-hmm.
The community, including your community, has educated me.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, including debunking certain things that I thought 10 years ago that I don't think anymore, like the Murchison Party,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, and
Mm-hmm.
numerous other things. And so I appreciate your compliments. So I would just say in closing that review the podcast today. Make a list of things you want me to document for you.
Okay.
And I can easily do it because I have a 4,000-page Word doc. All I have to do is search for that topic and then shoot you an email. I can do it in like 5 seconds per topic. Like the John Fane memo. I can get you there in a second, and you'll know exactly where it came from. Or dark complected man standing there with his fist in front of his belly. We got the photos to prove it. Anyhow, all right. Well, thank you, Francois. I really appreciate this.
Thank you very much. Okay. Again, well, thank you very much for that, and I will definitely write to you and ask you for a few documents.
Yeah, email me. God bless you, man. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
All right. Bye.